Hi everybody. A while ago I mentioned in a video that I had finished writing the second half of my biography. My intention was to get back and tell you a little bit more about it once I published it, and I completely forgot to do so. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Now what happened was that it became unwieldy. I had too much in there and I really felt like it was too big for one book, so I split it into 2 volumes. So now I've got the first volume of my autobiography, which I published in 2018, and I've got volume 2 and volume 3, which I published this year. So just a brief outline of what each of the books is about. This is volume 1, and it is the first 3 decades of my life up until I'm 31, nearly 32 I think, and it details a lot about my background, my family background, where I grew up, my schooling, school years, and how I eventually ended up living in Scandinavia after a brief stint of living in Germany. And also it explains my awakening to veganism, what happened, what inspired me to become vegan. That's all explained in this book here. There is a lot that happens, I suppose, but not anywhere near as much as what happens in volume 2. Volume 2 is really just 1 decade of my life. It's from about 1992 to the year 2000. And I really had a lot of trouble putting this book together, because during that particular decade of my life, really just so much happened. And I had taken some notes during those years, but to be honest, I wasn't keeping a regular diary or anything, so it was very difficult for me to recall exactly when things happened and the order that they were in. But with the help of friends and family, some old letters and such, I eventually pieced it all together, and now I'm pretty sure that I've got things in the right order. And in this book I explain how I eventually end up leaving Scandinavia, escaping military conscription and being chased by Interpol, and I was on my bicycle and just travelling around in Europe, not really knowing what I was doing, sort of aimless. I did have some kind of idea, but at that time of my life when I was on my bicycle, I didn't really have any proper aim in my life. I was just living day to day, and it wasn't an experience I won't forget. It was a beautiful experience, actually. Anyway, from living on a bicycle, I end up living in a community in France. All of that is explained in here. And I end up, following that, moving to Australia for 2 or 3 years, where I find myself living on an abandoned fruit orchard. And honestly, it was a time of my life that I felt more in my element than I've ever done before. I'm not trying to say that now my life isn't full of blessings and things are very different, but at that time I was running around naked on this beautiful piece of property that was like the closest thing to paradise that I've experienced on this earth. I was spending my days gardening and jumping in the river and swimming, and just had some good friends there. It was great. It was just truly a fantastic time of life for me. So that's all explained in here, and also the other things that happened during the time that I'm in Australia, because that isn't the time that I moved to Australia permanently. That didn't happen until volume 3. Anyway, all of that is explained there about my time on the bicycle, living in France, living in Australia for my first visit, and ending up travelling through Southeast Asia. That's covered in volume 2. And volume 3 is the last 24 years, because it is from the year 2000 till the present date. This year I published it, so it's very up to date of what's going on in my life. I didn't mention, but in volume 2 is where I woke up to the idea of fruitarianism and gained that realization that fruit was a unique food, in that it was the only food that was freely given. That's explained in the book. And in volume 3 is when I put together a whole series of revelations which I had in volume 1 and volume 2 and volume 3. I put them all together to form this philosophy of Eden Fruitarianism, which I've explained in my very first book, Destination Eden. And one thing that's happening in the books is not only is it outlining things that happened in my life in a chronological order, but they also explain the revelations that I had as a child. And basically all throughout my life, I had these kind of feelings thinking about spirituality, religion, governments, ethics and morals. And when I had these aha moments, I would try and embrace them and incorporate them into my life as best I could. So that's how the philosophy of Eden Fruitarianism began, and it was in the year 2000 I coined the term Eden Fruitarianism, but I didn't actually talk about it to the world until 2013 when I published Destination Eden. So that's those 3 books. I will put links in the description for all 3 of them, along with, if anybody's interested, links to my other books, because I've now written 7 or 8 books, or 8 including one children's book. So I will put links for them, and you can always find the links on my website, which is fruitnut.net. I feel a little bit uneasy, I suppose, that I'm putting so much time writing about myself, because I don't want this philosophy to be about me. It's not about me. I'm just some bard. I'm not really anybody important. I don't see myself as anyone special. I'm just someone who's had some ideas and I'm sharing them with the world. But as I've explained, as well as my life, I do explain the revelations that I had as and when I've had them. So there's that in the books too, and they follow along in the same kind of patterns as the other books that I've written, where they all have quotes on the pages that are relevant to whatever's being talked about at that particular time. Every page has got at least one quote in a little box. There's no photos, unfortunately. I went through a phase after becoming vegan, because back in the day there wasn't any such thing as a digital camera, and I knew that I forget whether it was the film of the camera or something in the developing of the film, something about that process, something about that used animal products, and I was very, very staunch vegan, animal rights activist. I didn't want to be using anything that came from an animal. Anything that I knew of that came from an animal I would absolutely boycott. So that's why I never took any photographs during a couple of decades of my life, really. I just refrained from doing that because I felt like I didn't want to support buying animal products, whether they be in the film or whatever it was. Didn't want to do that. So there's no photos. I think I do have some photographs of myself. There is one on the front cover here of me in Germany, but that's before I became vegan. And then the pictures that are on the volume 2 and volume 3 at the front. Volume 2 is me and my sister when she was with me while I was living in Denmark. I was living on an island in Denmark in volume 2 as well. There's a lot happened, as I said. There is a lot happened in volume 2. And in volume 3 it's Petushka and I on the front cover. And Petushka and I have been living together since 2006. And how we met and all that is explained in volume 3. So anyway, I think I've waffled on enough. If you're ever inclined to read them and do so, please don't hesitate to let me know what you think. I always like to hear feedback on what people think about my books. I do appreciate that very much. So thank you for listening, everybody, and we will see you, as always, next Friday. Take care. Bye.